Alongside Brent Hubbs, I'm Austin Price, talking about quarterbacks as we kick off the Volquest.com positional previews. Brent, this is going to start, end, and this whole team's driven by one guy, and that's number 2, Jared Garantano.
Well, he's got to stay healthy, okay? And this is his football team. For the first time since he's been here, he's not having to beat anybody out for the job. He's not really looking over his shoulder at anybody trying to take his job. You know, it was unusual for Jared last summer because Keller Chris came in. And look, Keller Chris wanted to play. He didn't see himself as an insurance policy. And Jared wasn't getting love from the coaching staff. Everybody was brand new, didn't know where he sat. There's no question where he sits right now. He sits at the head of the table in the quarterback room. He is Tennessee's starting quarterback. They've got to keep him healthy. And because of that, I think Jared's better than he's ever been. I think he's got a mental confidence about him that he hasn't had since he's been at Tennessee. He's always been able to throw it.
And he's always been a confident kid, but there's a difference. When there's a belief in you, there's a difference.
I think it's a belief in the system, too. No offense to Tyson Hilton, but I think there were some things last year that were challenging for him. He didn't have some of the freedoms with some of the protection and adjustments that he wanted to make. I think Jim Chaney has created more confidence and created a belief in this system for Jerry Garantano, and I think that's very good for Tennessee. The challenge is, can they keep him healthy? He's got to do some things better. He's not perfect by any means. Got to get the ball out of his hands faster, got to make quicker decisions, got to see the field better, continue to grow the way he did in the spring, and I think he's done a good job of that this summer. We'll see about that when they open fall camp in August. But the bottom line is, if Tennessee's going to get bowl eligible and go to a bowl or have a chance to win 7, 8 football games or even 9, as some of these people nationally are trying to forecast, Jared Garantano has to have a big year for Tennessee.
All right, let's play devil's advocate. Let's say Jared Garantano does not stay healthy. The offensive line doesn't protect. Something happens. Who are you going to?
Both. You play both of them.
Kind of the way they when Colquitt went down.
I think that's what happens. And it sorts itself out. I don't think you're going to come out of fall camp and say, JT Shroud is the backup. Brian Maurer is the definite backup. Because you don't know how they're going to react in a game. Now, if you're in mop-up duty or that type of thing, okay, maybe you have a clear defined number 2. But if Jared Garantano's going down, you're in full-blown survival mode at that point. And you're going to play Shroud, you're going to play Maurer to one of them asserts themselves.
May play Jajuan.
And
he loves to play quarterback.
By any means necessary. I think it's interesting. Shroud is a guy that when you see routes on air and you see
he's pretty now.
Everything's real pretty. The question is, can he play the game as more people get on the field?
Yeah.
And you look at his high school numbers, everybody talks about the interceptions. I think that's a product of more people on the field. Some guys don't look as good in routes versus air, but they get better as there's more people on the field. Other guys don't. I think for JT, it's about seeing the field when there's 22 guys out there, not when there's 1-on-1s or 7-on-7s out there. With Maurer, we just don't know. I mean, he's got moxie. He's got a lot of confidence about himself. It's an unusual throw-in motion in a lot of ways, but I don't think it's one that Jim Chaney has said we got to tear it completely down and build it back up. He does some things there, but you never know how he's going to react when the lights go on.
It's Jared Garantano's world. All the Vol fans are living in it, and they're hoping that they live into a 9 or maybe, who knows, 10-win season, Hubs. That's what Vol fans hope.
Well, for that to happen, it's got to be a 12-game world, 13-game world for Jared Garantano. He's got to play every football game and remain healthy. That's the biggest key for him.
He's Brent Hubbs. I'm Austin Price. The Volquest.com positional previews will roll on tomorrow with the running backs.
Rob Lewis along with Jesse Simonton, as today we move on to the running backs at our Volquest.com positional previews, getting ready for fall camp. And Jesse, a couple of familiar faces and an exciting freshman at a unit that, kind of struggled last year.
Really 2 straight years. I mean, Tennessee's been the worst yards per carry average the last 2 years in the SEC, both 2017 and then even with the new offense and Jeremy Pruitt a year ago in 2018. Obviously, Ty Chandler returns, Tim Jordan, Jeremy Banks is going to be at running back full-time. But what can they get out of this unit that's not boom or bust? I mean, Ty, 8 carries, went for almost 50% of his yardage a year ago. The other 100 went for almost 300 yards total. That's not going to cut it. Is Tim Jordan explosive enough? The guy I think you kind of teased there, Eric Gray, what can they get out of the freshman?
Now, I'm excited to see him, and I think he, to me, looks like a guy that you can use in a lot of different ways. I mean, put him in the slot. I mean, just get the ball to him out in space. And that's one area where Chandler did excel last year, was as a receiver. I mean, that was one of the nicest wrinkles of the offense. And you mentioned the yards per carry, 3.7, dead last in the SEC. I mean, that's not cutting it. And some of that's on the offensive line, to be sure.
100%.
To be sure, but that also great running backs can make an offensive line look better, and Tennessee's not had a lot of that.
And how many times did we hear a year ago, whether it was Jeremy Pruitt lamenting, specifically even calling out Tim Jordan by name, saying that, basically he was freelancing too much, not, going where the hole was, kind of not even calling out a specific guy by name, but saying our running backs, aren't breaking tackles. They get the first guy, they can't make a miss. That's where we're going to see what a guy like Eric Gray can do. If Jeremy Banks can, fix his fumbleitis issues, does he maybe get some more touches because he kind of can be that hammer that Jim Chaney's looking for? I do think Jim Chaney's going to be kind of the wild card with this group because he's had so much success with tailbacks at Arkansas and Georgia, utilizing them in different ways. Ty Chandler, I think, can be explosive in the passing game. Does Tennessee kind of reincorporate that jet motion game? Georgia did a lot of that. Is that a way that you can kind of use Carlin Fields and Me's speed? So there's some wild card dynamics with this group for sure in 2019.
And I think and you touched on it, but not even just the big sexy home run plays. They've got to be able to pick up 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1, and that's an area where I think maybe Jeremy Banks can help them because you're not going to block everybody in this league on every play. So you've either got to be able to power through a tackle or make a guy miss in the hole, and they have been woefully inept at that.
O-line allowed, I think, 96 tackles for loss a year ago, easily the worst in the SEC.
Unbelievable.
And a lot of it was because, at times, even if the O-line just held their man up, the running backs could not break that one tackle. So certainly an area to watch this fall. I do think there's some potential with this group, but they're absolutely going to need to elevate their game for Tennessee's offense, I think, to get to a point where they can win them more than just kind of a flash-in-the-pan game like Auburn.
No question. It's encouraging that Ty Chandler's shown that he can be a home run hitter in this league. Tim Jordan has flashed some, and we all think Jeremy Banks can be a physical player. Eric Gray looks exciting, but it's just unproven.
And not a ton of depth. I think my last thing there is that, if you get 1 or 2 injuries, Tennessee could be in trouble because you're talking about a guy like Princeton Fan or some other guys, deep down that maybe move to that running back position. I guess the last thing here, can a guy like Quavaris Crouch, does he maybe get some touches in some sort of, weird package? He was obviously a 5-star running back. Aaron Beasley also going to play defense. They do at least have some safety net options should something happen.
Interesting addition right there. For Jesse Simonton, I'm Rob Lewis. That's a look at Tennessee's running backs as we roll on with the preseason positional previews.
Alongside Brent Hubbs, I'm Austin Price, talking tight ends today on the Volquest.com positional previews. Brian Niedermeyer's group adds 2 big bodies in this most recent class, Shawn Brown, Jackson Lowe. Jackson Lowe was here for spring, Shawn Brown was not. Can either one of those guys upset a guy like Austin Pope to be that number 2 tight end behind Dominique Wood-Anderson?
I think it goes back to one thing, and that's how physical are they. Look, Dominique Wood-Anderson, you know what he is. He's your playmaker guy. He's never going to be a blocker. He might get in somebody's way, but he's not pancaking. He's not going to lead that room.
He's David Leverton. He's just got to get in somebody's way.
Right. He may not, maybe an intimidation block, but he's not going to physically knock anybody down. That's not his strength. It's not what he does. It's a contract year for him. He wants to show a bunch of catches, and he wants to be a playmaker. And I think Jim Chaney sees him as a playmaker. So to answer your question, if Shawn Brown or Jackson Lowe can be physical and can show the strength and can be an inline blocker, absolutely. They can push Austin Pope, Jacob Warren, and the rest of the guys in this group that haven't really proven themselves from a physical standpoint.
All right, let's talk DWA. You expect Jim Chaney to get him the ball a lot in 2019. He and Ty Chandler seem like guys that are going to get force-fed the ball. They're going to have plenty of opportunities. Now, whether they make the plays or not, that's up to them, but they're going to have the opportunity to make some plays.
Well, and I think when you talk about finding a playmaker, that's not a knock on Marquez Callaway. It's not a knock on Palmer. But I think when you're talking about matchups,
yeah.
The question is, can Palmer and Callaway, can they beat press coverage consistently? How many years have we been telling this story about wide receivers at Tennessee? Can they win press coverage? You put Dominique Wood-Anderson on a linebacker, he can athletically beat him. You get him out there on a corner or a nickel safety, then you think you got enough physicality to do that. So he should be a guy who is a great short yardage guy to move the sticks, should be good in the red zone. And look, Jim Chaney with Isaac Nada and some other guys through the years, Michael Rivera here, have found ways to incorporate the tight ends vertically in the passing game, creating some matchups that they like. I think you'll see Jim Chaney try to do that a lot with Dominique Wood-Anderson.
You look elsewhere, we talk about the freshman tackles when we break down the offensive line. We're going to talk about the freshman tight ends here. How much do they factor? I think it's a lot to put on some of those guys. I think Shawn Brown's kind of been the flavor of the week in summer camp because he is so physical. There are a couple of older heads in that room. Andrew Craig, who's a former walk-on, who's now a scholarship guy, played at Webb, and then Austin Pope, who's battled back injuries during his entire time at UT. Do you kind of expect those guys to at least start the year as that backup to DWA?
Well, I think you're going to see them play some 2 tight end sets, and so you have both of them in there. I think if Pope's back can stay healthy, Jim Chaney's not opposed to an H-back and doing some different things that way. They don't have a true fullback on this roster. So a guy like Craig, a guy like Pope could be an H-back and be a factor while Wood Anderson's doing some other things. The challenge for Pope is can he stay healthy? I think with those 2 freshmen, you don't force everything on them. You kind of spoon-feed it along the way. And you just take 4 guys, really, that you have there and try to manage and create a second tight end out of 4 guys. Wood Anderson's your mainstay. And then those other 4 guys, you're trying to find what does this guy do best in what situation and use them schematically to your advantage.
He is Brent Hubbs. I'm Austin Price. That's a look at the tight ends. The Volquest.com positional previews roll on.
With Jesse Simonton, Brent Hubbs, Volquest.com, our positional previews continue on the offensive side of the ball. Wide receivers. Is there enough playmakers in that group for Tennessee, T. Martin, and Jim Chaney this year?
Well, we'll see. I do think that Tennessee believes that's probably the strength of their offense right now outside of quarterback Jarrett Garantano. It's a veteran group. It's a group that has a ton of experience. I think more than 200 combined catches when you're talking about Callaway, Brandon Johnson, Jajuan Jennings, and then can Josh Palmer kind of emerge and become more of the complete playmaker instead of just the, deep guy who basically was just hitting 9 routes a year ago, averaged 21.01 yards per reception, which would have ranked number 1 in the SEC if he had the minimum catches. The biggest question for me is, does this group have enough speed? Is it too many power forward, small forward types, and not enough diversity? That's something that we clearly see they're attacking in the 2020 class.
Right.
So what does that mean for this team in the fall?
Well, I think that's everybody's talking about Dominic Wood Anderson. You're talking about Ty Chandler creating mismatches. I think that's the biggest thing when you look at this receiver group is where is there a mismatch? I mean, Jajuan Jennings is big, so if you get him against a small corner, you could certainly win that mismatch. But how many mismatch problems does this group cause, even though they've got a lot of proven guys on this team?
Yeah, and can they beat, man coverage, one-on-one coverage? Obviously, I think Callaway is a really good, jump ball guy. He obviously showed his exploits there against Auburn, had another huge catch against Florida a year ago. Can he become a more complete player? We've seen it in spurts from him. Georgia Tech, a couple other games where he has kind of flashed that after the catch wiggle, but it's not a lot. Sometimes it seems like there's some stiffness there, and that's why I think they're going to look for different ways to kind of get guys incorporated, whether it is moving Josh Palmer around. I thought one of the smartest things in an offense that really struggled a year ago that Tyson Helton did was putting Jajuan Jennings in the slot.
Right.
Jajuan doesn't run the way he ran in 2016. He obviously has continued to battle knee problems through the last couple of years, but he was able to kind of box out some of those smaller corners in the slot. He also had, a couple big plays against Auburn, 100 yards against Alabama. I think you're going to see Jim Chaney do the same thing. The question is, does Chaney have that go-to slot guy that he can just burn? Jordan Murphy hasn't materialized that. We'll see if he can come from it. I'm skeptical that the 2 freshmen are going to be able to get on the field on day 1, but we'll see. They obviously, will be able to compete in training camp for one of those spots.
Well, what we know of Jim Chaney is he will take a freshman and he might put a half dozen plays in for him and just kind of build it in slowly for him if he thinks that guy can be a weapon. I think the one thing about this receiver group, while maybe they're not the fastest, they do have size, which goes in their favor. I thought for as inconsistent schematically as Tennessee was a year ago offensively, one week it was 9 routes, the next week it was, I don't know,
throwing the ball 2 yards.
I thought they caught the ball well. I thought their hands were good. I thought they were a consistent group a year ago, even though maybe they're not elite speed, maybe they're not elite playmakers. They're pretty pretty trustworthy.
They are. They're strong-handed, and again, based on that experience, Garantano has a lot of. He's taken a lot of reps with these guys, so there's a comfortability there. There's a cohesiveness and kind of a cohesion with that group. What does a guy like Gerard means? He's a guy that came to camp here and ran 4.4 at 200 some odd pounds, jumped 35, 36 inches in the vertical. Does Chaney kind of figure out a way to put him on the field for some of those plays? He's a guy that's raw. He maybe doesn't have kind of the secure hands of some of the veteran receivers, but they just need kind of another dynamic. I like the the solid base of this group, but
Right.
I think it's going to take something else to really make it like a super explosive unit.
It will be fun to see how T. Barton and this group develops. There's a lot of people talking about this team and wanting it to compare it to Lane Kiffin's team when Jim Chaney first got here and how he revitalized Jonathan Crompton. One of the keys to that was a veteran receiver group. Denarius Moore, Gerald Jones, 2 veterans that helped the quarterback really get rolling. Can this veteran receiver group help Jerry Garantano really get his footing under him and really take off as a quarterback? Will be interesting to watch in fall camp and early in this season. That's a look at the wide receivers. For Jesse Simonton, I'm Brent Hubbs.
Alongside Jesse Simonton, I'm Austin Price as the Volquest.com positional previews roll on. Offensive line today, Jesse. Jeremy Pruitt arrived here, almost, a year and a half ago and said, "Where's the beef?" I think Tennessee's finally got some beef up front. Trey Smith looks like he's going to be on par to be a part of this group in 2019. Obviously, they've added Wanye Morris and Darnell Wright, some nice young talent, and then they've got players coming along, in the offensive trenches, whether it be Brandon Kennedy, Kayron Calvert, or Jerome Carvin.
Yeah, but and even guys like Niehaus and Tatum have gotten over 300 pounds. I think I looked it up a year ago. Last year, Tennessee had 8 guys that weighed over 300 pounds on the offensive line. They now have a dozen. So that certainly speaks to the added size there. This unit, to me, is all about upside. There's a ton of question marks, whether it's Trey Smith's availability.
The ceiling is high.
Will these bookend tackles be ready to play on day one? But the upside of this group is so much higher than a year ago. We know what Darnell Wright is physically. Can he handle the mental aspect? Wanye Morris obviously was here early, got to participate in spring ball. Brandon Kennedy, there was a lot of flair about him a year ago. Had a tough first game and then immediately blows out his knee, at 2 days after the week 1 practice. So I like the upside of this group. Kayron Calvert, I think he's as tantalizing really as any offensive lineman on this team. The question is, can they find a cohesive 5? Can guys stay healthy? Will the freshmen be ready? A lot of folks are just assuming that those 2 guys are going to be starting on day 1 or that they're going to be ready to be, dudes on day 1. What happens if that's not the case?
A lot of questions, but to me, if you hit on all the questions, then Tennessee's offensive line is far deeper than a year ago. But to me, because of all the questions, it means you don't have to hit on everything. Like, are the freshmen ready? Maybe they're not, and they have to lean on Jameer Johnson early on. What's the availability of some of these other players that have kind of been battling back from injury? I think they're deep enough where they can survive an injury. It just can't be to the right player. Like, if Trey Smith starts the year but can't finish the year, to me that's a blow. But if he's able to give you a full season, I think Tennessee's offensive line around him can be really, really good because they're deep. They have more bodies than they had a year ago, more quality bodies.
I'd say more quality bodies. I still think Tennessee might be in trouble at tackle. I don't know how much that, do you really want to run out, the Tatums and such at tackle? Those are nice deep reserve options if you have to,
That's my point, is if it has to get to that point, those are guys that have at least played football.
Yeah,
it's
agree.
not like rolling out Joe Keeler, and I like Joe, he's a great kid. But rolling out Joe Keeler against LSU a few years ago. Those days, it seems to have passed Tennessee. Now if they're going to a third body, it's somebody that's played and is a comparable talent.
They have. The numbers are still lower than Jeremy Pruitt and Will Friend won. They lost 5 guys in the last year to medical retirements. And so I do think we'll see what kind of happens with this group. This is a unit that was, they gave up 96 tackles for loss a year ago, easily worst in the SEC. Tennessee only averaged 3.7 yards per carry, last in the SEC. Quarterback Jarrett Garantano got knocked out of, 3 games a year ago. So if the O-line cannot protect or cannot run block better, it's that and the defensive line are going to determine how good this team is. If you keep Jarrett upright, I think Tennessee feels pretty good about their playmakers around him. But if he's getting beat to hell, Tennessee's going to be in trouble once again. And so, there's a lot. I like the ceiling of this group, and I think at worst they can be serviceable. But, there's a lot of questions they're going to have to answer early and immediately in week 2 against BYU.
If the freshmen answer the call, if Trey Smith answers the call, you probably like where you're at with Brandon Kennedy as your starting center. And then there's that other guard spot that you've got Kayron, you've got Jerome Carvin, Jameer Johnson.
Ryan Johnson.
To me, there's a lot more positives to this group than a year ago. There are some big questions, but there are at least some positives depth-wise and quality body-wise heading into the 2019 season. Talking offensive line, he's Jesse Simonton. I'm Austin Price as the Volquest.com positional previews roll on. Alongside Rob Lewis, I'm Austin Price. As the Volquest.com positional previews roll on. Talking defensive line today, Rob. It's an important unit for this team. You know, a lot of bodies, but you know, are they quality bodies? Is kind of the biggest question going into 2019.
It's a huge question. I mean, Tennessee was better against the run last year than I thought they would have been. I mean, they weren't great by any means. I think they were 10th in the SEC, gave a little over 4 yards a carry. But the only guy really, in my mind, that's coming back that is proven, and he's not extremely proven, is Emmett Gooden, who came along more and more as the year went on. You know, I think it's kind of tells you where this group is at. That's the guy that you point to right now and say, man, he's probably the most proven guy we have.
Well, one SEC coach told our Jesse Simonton during the offseason that they knew that if they got into the third and fourth quarter and just kind of kept chipping away a little bit, that Tennessee's three-man defensive line rotation, because that's all it was no rotation a year ago, would eventually just get tired and tired and tired. This year, you look at this group, I think they got more bodies. Where are they at with Aubrey Solomon's appeal?
Huge.
Where are they at with some of the young players like John Mincy? How is he coming along? To me, that's the biggest question marks, because if those guys can progress, then you feel a fraction bit better, especially if Solomon is eligible. If not, then all of a sudden it's a real game changer up front defensively.
I can't recall any time in almost 2 decades of doing this when they've been relying on 2 junior college transfers like they are with Savion Williams and Darrell Milton. I mean, it's imperative that they get something out of those guys. I mean, they don't have to be all SEC players, but they've got to be able to give some quality snaps. Or, I mean, as you mentioned, if Solomon's appeal doesn't go Tennessee's way, they're in trouble.
Let's talk about what Solomon brings to the table. In your mind, what does he give Tennessee?
Well, I mean, at the very least, he's an NFL body that has played, in a big-time conference. And, he wasn't a superstar, but he showed that he belonged at Michigan. I mean, if nothing else, you get a guy who you feel confident about can at least hold his own in the SEC. Is he ready to be a difference maker? I'm not ready to say that, but he's got the potential to be. But he's at least going to be solid.
Up front, defensively, Tracy Rockers got his hands full. Expect him to be loud, extremely loud, all through fall camp, because he's going to be pushing these young guys. By the time you got to October last year, he'd kind of, come off Kyle Phillips and Shy Tuttle and Alexis Johnson, because he knew those were the guys he needed every week, so he couldn't just lean on them too hard in practice. I think he's going to lean on all these guys, because I think he feels like the more bodies, the better chance that this defensive line has a chance to actually be credible in 2019.
And one guy we haven't is does Greg Emerson take a step forward? I mean, how much was he impacted by the injury last year? I mean, how much did that set him back? How much has being in the program for a couple of years helped him? I thought he flashed a little bit in the spring game, but that's a big body inside that, any big body inside could help him. And, pass rush is something we hadn't touched on yet. Kyle Phillips, 7 sacks last year from that defensive end position. Nobody even close to that kind of production. Tennessee was almost dead last in the SEC, tied for 11th with 25 sacks last year. Darrell Taylor, is going to give you some of that off the edge. Do they have anybody that can give them some push in the middle?
Big question. Tennessee's defensive line could determine a lot in 2019, how good this defense is and how many wins Tennessee ends up with in the win column could be very well dictated by this group. For Rob Lewis, I'm Austin Price, as the Volquest.com positional previews roll on.
With a look at the kicking game as our positional previews continue, I'm Brent Hubbs with Rob Lewis. Okay, a year ago, everybody was talking about, they don't have a kicker. They don't have anybody proven at the kicker spot. Now you got a place kicker who kicked a year ago. You got a punter who didn't have a great spring, but did have a solid year last year. What do you like out of the kickers, first of all?
I mean, just the fact that Samaglia did it last year. I mean, anytime you're breaking in a new kicker, you're worried. I mean, he wasn't spectacular, but he was solid. 10 of 13, 4 of 6 from outside of 40 yards. Didn't show a huge leg. I think his long was 45 yards, but at least was consistent. And that's a spot where, if you get it inside the 30-yard line, you've got to get some points. And if nothing else, I think Samaglia proved that last year.
All right. At the punter position, you had a little battle there with Doyle and Paxton Brooks, and you end up with Joe Doyle there. Again, not the greatest spring for him. Didn't turn the ball over well enough at times in the spring, but he should be the guy for Tennessee because he had a solid year a year ago.
Yeah, he wasn't bad. 41 yards and some change per punt. And I think more importantly, put it where he was supposed to. Tennessee's punt coverage was really good last year. They didn't get burnt. And, I think if you're not going to kick it 56 yards a pop, then you've got to put it where you predetermine your coverage is going to be, and he did a solid job of that.
And you mentioned the coverage units; they were solid all year long. They only gave up a couple of returns of note that were big returns. a lot of starters on those units a year ago. With what Jeremy Pruitt recruited last year, can he pull some starters off and play some freshmen there and not have a drop off in their coverage?
I would think that, when you look at all especially the young linebackers that they brought in, I would be surprised if Quavaris Crouch, Toto, and Roman Harrison didn't factor in there somewhere. I would think that at least it will take a little bit of pressure off of, feeling like you have to play, 6 or 7 starters on coverage units.
Well, now the question is, can they make some plays in the special teams game? They were just kind of okay at best last year. Can they find some hidden yards in the kick return game and in the punt return game? We'll start with kick returns. Ty Chandler?
I mean, has done it before.
Is that going to be the guy?
Marquez Callaway's done it before. I mean, I think they have a lot of candidates, but there's not one guy you can point to and say, man, that's his job.
Aren't you curious to see what the gray kid looks like?
For sure.
I mean, as a kickoff return guy,
I think he's one. I thought Bryce Thompson showed some flashes in the spring. I mean, he certainly looks like a guy that's got some wiggle and some burn that can do it. And again, I mean, I think they've got some athletes that look like they can do some things with it in space. And the way this offense struggled at times last year, you'd want to think that they can generate something in special teams.
A lot of candidates, though. I mean,
yes.
We'll see what you do with a freshman if you want to put a freshman back there or not. But you at least have some athletic candidates in the return game if you want to go that direction with some youth. Will be interesting to see. Charles Kelly gone as a special teams coordinator. Thought he was solid in that role a year ago. Now you've got Kevin Shearer in that role with the special teams. It's going to be a big unit for Tennessee. When the margin of error is still where it's at with this team, they can't give up anything in the kicking game.
I think it's encouraging. You mentioned there's a changeover in coordinators, but it's still Pruitt's philosophy. And I think it's encouraging that they were solid in that area last year, which when you have good special teams, that's always a sign to be a well coached, because that's a detail-oriented thing.
Well, and they certainly put a lot of emphasis on it when you talk about the number of starters that played on all those units a year ago. That's a look at Tennessee's kicking game. We'll continue with our position previews at Volquest.com. For Rob Lewis, I'm Brent Hubbs. With Rob Lewis, Brent Hubbs, our positional previews continue here at Volquest.com, taking a look at the linebackers. Interesting, when you talk about linebacker, everybody wants to know about one guy, J.J. Peterson. What's the latest on him? We'll get to that in a minute. Let's talk about a couple of the veterans for Tennessee. Daniel Petulli, Darrell Taylor. Obviously, if this defense is going to be much improved in year 2 under Jeremy Pruitt, it's got to start with those two guys.
Those two guys have to be huge, and not only consistent, but they've got to create disruptive plays, which Darrell Taylor, as the year went on, got better and better. I mean, finished the year with 10.5 tackles for loss, led Tennessee with 8 sacks, and they tend to take another step up. Daniel Petulli, lots of tackles. Not quite as disruptive. 6 tackles for a loss. I think if you're looking for improvement, you want to see him making more plays behind the line of scrimmage.
We hear from Jeremy Pruitt, this defense is real simple. Once you get the concepts down, then you hear from Daniel Petulli in the spring, and he's talking about how much easier it is the second go around because you get an understanding of it. Just for that group in general, how much more effective do you think they can be in year 2 of this system?
I mean, I think that's kind of a common conception, and I think it's usually borne out. I mean, you would hope that would be the case for sure. I mean, I think that pretty clearly they were swimming early in the year, and I thought you saw some drop off. I think because of injuries and depth and fatigue and stuff. But I mean, I think guys got more comfortable with the system as it went along. And in Petulli in particular, I think you're talking about a cerebral kid who is kind of going to be calling the shots there on the second level, running the defense. I think that him feeling more comfortable leads to everybody else feeling more comfortable since he's so integral to getting guys lined up.
It will be interesting to see if they move him around and how much they use him off the edge or do different things with him. Shannon Reid, Will Ignont, 2 veteran guys that are trying to find a place. I don't want to say they've been recruited over, but they've recruited some highly recruited guys, some highly acclaimed guys behind them. They got to make some hay early, I think, in August because they are going to get pushed.
Very much so, and I think both those guys probably had a nice spring. I think Shannon Reid was probably one of the surprises of the spring, a guy that I personally have kind of had written off, didn't fit in with what the new staff was going to do, and I think he kind of flashed. Ignont looked like he had a little grasp of the system, but as you mentioned, probably some of the stars of this incoming recruiting class aren't at that linebacker position.
Well, and that's what we'll get to. J.J. Peterson, can he stay healthy? What can he do after being here for a year? Quavaris Crouch looks the part, still learning the position, and Henry Toto may be the most prepared guy of the freshmen or of the newcomers coming in because he has played linebacker at a high level at a highly acclaimed high school.
Yeah, I was going to say the competition, the school he's coming from, and Crouch to me in the spring was one of the biggest surprises among the freshmen, just as you mentioned, physically. I didn't expect him to be that thick. I thought he would be more of a Ray Knock Thompson as a freshman linebacker, and he was not. I mean, he looked the part.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how quickly he can learn that. Then what do you do with a guy like Jordan Allen? Does he find a place at all to help you?
Big year for him.
What do you do with Peterson again if he can get in, get acclimated into the system? So some youth behind them, a lot of questions.
Yeah, and we didn't mention Roman Harrison, who looks like he might have been kind of a hidden gem in this recruiting class, and I think is impressing people since he's gotten on campus.
What we know is Jeremy Pruitt wants playmakers at that linebacker position. Maybe they're not all 3 down guys, but they want to sub in all those sub packages. They want a guy who can do some stuff off the edge. He needs that group with the concerns they got on the defensive line. They have got to make a lot of plays, particularly against the run.
Tons, and arguably your 2 biggest playmakers are at the position. They're your 2 biggest proven playmakers, and Darrell Taylor and Batuli.
Yeah, Taylor probably the most talked about NFL prospect on this roster. Batuli with a ton of talent. Be an interesting fall camp for those guys. Who emerges? Who pushes whom? And where does everybody line up at the linebacker spot? It'll be interesting to watch to see how it is in Derek Ansley's offense or defense, as well as Jeremy Pruitt's. For the linebackers, that's Rob Lewis. I'm Brent Hubbs.
Roll through the defense, talking defensive backs today. I think it's the deepest unit in the on the defensive side of the ball for Tennessee. You've got some experience in a guy like Nigel Water. You've got now second-year corners in Alante Taylor and Bryce Thompson. I think Jeremy Pruitt likes where this secondary is. Now, are they perfect? No, but I think the experience lends itself to saying this is the best unit you have on the defensive side.
Yeah, I think they're specifically deep at safety. I do think Pruitt is a bit concerned, and that's why they hope that, one of these newcomers, whether it's Warren Burrell, Tyus Fields, Kenny Solomon, somebody can give him some snaps out at corner. Kenneth George. I think George is going to be a name to watch at star. There's a lot to talk about with this group. Obviously, I think the starting, the sophomore duo. I mean, Bryce Thompson, it seems like a star in the making.
And Alante Taylor looks like $1 million.
And Alante Taylor is as physically gifted, I think, as any player, regardless of position on this roster. And so that makes a tantalizing duo. How can you kind of build around them? A year ago, Bryce Thompson had 3 interceptions. First time Tennessee's had a cornerback have that many since Justin Coleman in 2014. I mean, that's a long time. Tennessee only had 5 interceptions all season in 2017. One of those guys that needs to step up, though, around those 2 corners is Nigel Water. This is his last go-around. He's a senior. He's played a ton of snaps the last 2 years.
And appears to have grown up off the field.
Now can that translate into making more plays on the field? He's been steady, but he hasn't been that dynamo that I think people expected. He has 1 career interception. Yeah, I mean, that would just mystify people if you had told them that 3 years ago.
One guy that to me is the X factor in the secondary is a guy that I thought was starting to come on a year ago, Trayvon Flowers.
Yeah, and I think Trayvon probably has as good a shot as any to start at safety opposite of Nigel. He'll be in that battle with Theo Jackson and Sean Schamberger, but Trayvon just offers upside that those 2 don't. I mean, he's a playmaker. He's raw, which is why he hasn't played a ton of football, but Pruitt loves the kid. Pruitt loves how just competitive the kid is. The fact that his instincts are as good as really any defensive back on the field. The question for me with this group is going to be the star nickel spot. Baylen Buchanan's been hurt. What is his availability? Last year, whether it was Baylen, Theo Jackson, Sean Schamberger, Nigel Water, Tennessee, according to PFF, was one of the worst teams in the country at defending the slot. That's huge in Jeremy Pruitt's defense, considering how important that star position is. Yep. So that's why a guy like Kenneth George, he's apparently made some buzz in 7-on-7s this offseason. What happens with a guy like D'Angelo Gibbs? Does he become eligible? He's another X factor or wild card with this group. Tennessee's got to figure out who's going to play that star spot, which is why I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee continues to get burned inside. We saw it some in the spring. They may move Bryce Thompson inside, so that opens up another opportunity out wide for a guy like Warren Burrell or a George or somebody else.
And don't forget about Baylen Buchanan, the guy that's played some football. He's been battling shoulder injuries all off season. What will his availability be coming up here when fall camp starts at the 1st of August? Probably the deepest unit on the defense. Has some talent, still has some question marks, but you probably feel better about this group than you do any other on that side of the ball. And then you add in the fact that Tennessee switched secondary coaches. Derek Ansley now the defensive coordinator and secondary coach here at Tennessee. What kind of impact will he have in 2019? For Jesse Simonton, I'm Austin Price.
With Jesse Simonton, Brent Hubbs, as we wrap up our positional previews at Volquest.com. Tennessee just over a week away or so from the start of fall camp. a lot of eyes on a lot of this team and a lot of individuals on this team. I think a lot of eyes on this coaching staff as well. It was all new a year ago, Jesse. It's still got a lot of newness this year when you talk about Jim Chaney's here, Derek Ansley's here, T. Martin's here. What do you like about this coaching staff for Jeremy Pruitt as he heads into year 2?
Well, I think, Pruitt has kind of learned some hard lessons, and not surprisingly, every first-year coach is going to kind of take some lumps that maybe he did need to relinquish a little bit of control, whether it's both defensively. Now he's not going to be calling plays. I think that's a huge deal, the fact that Derek Ansley is going to be a first-time play caller, but especially on offense. I think the fact that, he felt the need to kind of go out and really coach, and that Tennessee's paying for it, to get Jim Chaney, because Jim Chaney has so much veteran experience. He knows this league. He can be this walk-around CEO coach, and a guy like T. Martin was just kind of like, the cherry on top. I mean, he has the potential to be a future head coach here down the league. What can he do with both this wide receiver group, and how can he kind of help the offense, both from the quarterback and receiver kind of experience together?
Well, then you look at Winky moves from running backs to quarterback. Obviously a more natural fit for him. And I think you see, just in watching spring practice, a much more assertive Chris Winky as a coach, as a quarterback's coach, compared to what we saw with him trying to learn how to be a running backs coach a year ago.
Well, you talk about the newness of this staff. They're only replacing 3 guys from a year ago. Helton obviously took the head coaching job at Western. And then you got Charles Kelly's at Alabama, and then Terry Fair, lost his job. But 4 guys now have new jobs on this staff. So you got David Johnson moving from running backs after he was at receivers. Chris Winky is now at his natural position. Kevin Scher is no longer the defensive coordinator. So how this all kind of works together is going to be fascinating to watch, because I do think some guys are maybe a bit more comfortable now. I think they're in more of their natural positions. But what does that mean for this? What does that mean for this team? How does it kind of translate to on-the-field success?
How much control do you think Jeremy Pruitt really is going to relinquish on defense? I know Derek Ansley is going to call it. Can he really let go of that in game and everything else? How hard of a challenge do you think that is for Jeremy Pruitt? Well, or is it easier because he groomed Derek Ansley for this position in a lot of ways?
I would say that is the more likely scenario, and that's what I would go to, that he's kind of seen this firsthand for how he saw how Kirby was groomed by Nick, how he personally was groomed by Nick, and that, once an assistant kind of gets to a certain point in their careers, you got to kind of let them take the reins a little bit. And so I think Pruitt is still going to be heavily involved in the game planning and in game time decisions, but on kind of a down-by-down basis. I do think it's going to be, Derek Ansley's call, and Jeremy will be over the headset, if he wants to throw in an audible, or if he wants to, run to the sideline and have Baylen Buchanan, call a cornerback blitz like he did against Auburn.
Well, it's interesting. In game last year, this was a pretty organized staff. It may have been chaotic on the sidelines, but there was not a lot of gaps where you went, what were they doing, clock management? What were they doing, this type of thing? Overall, though, for management of the program, what's key for Jeremy Pruitt in year 2? I mean, is it managing his team for an entire season so that they're not out of gas late in the year? Is it just letting guys have control? What's the biggest key for Jeremy Pruitt's growth in year 2?
I would say it's letting your coaches do their job, and then by that trickling down to you be the head coach. And so that is kind of managing your team throughout the season, not getting frustrated by maybe some of the ups and downs and the inconsistencies, so that when you show up to play Vanderbilt, you still at least have some legs, because that's going to be a big game for Tennessee again this year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. A lot of money invested in this coaching staff, a lot of high praise with this staff, a lot of big names with this staff, a lot of expectations because of this coaching staff. That's going to do it for the Volquest.com positional previews. For Jesse Simonton, I'm Brent Hubbs.